is they drill a vertical shaft, and then they'll drill horizontally around.
So it's not just down.
No, it's not just down. It's like a wheel, exactly. You've got 8 horizontal sections. Each of those horizontal sections is literally only going to be a few hundred yards, because you guys want to come off the tour? Yeah, you get sight, tour. Tour, green tour.
This is Ian, our crane, who's been doing all the talks all over.
They'll show you just going off on one, and that's what you think that's all there is. But so there's 8 of these. Then there's a few issues here, because once you've drilled, then you've got to open up the geology, because if you just drill into this geology, and then when you open the well, nothing will happen because there's not enough pressure to put the oil or the gas into the well. So you have to fracture. It's called hydraulic fracturing. The official term is reservoir stimulation. Anyway, so it's called fracking. So once you've opened the well, you create the fractures, the artificial fractures in the rock, by pumping phenomenal amounts of water down at enormous pressure. Okay, the pressure is normally about 7,500 to 8,000 pounds per square inch.
Wow.
And at a conservative estimate, each well takes about 2 million gallons of water, and it has to be fresh water. What a great question. Where's the water coming from? Yes. Good question. Nobody's answering that question.
So you'll see the level of the reservoir
drilling into the aquifer, yeah. They're trying here. It is alleged that they're actually drilling in the aquifers to take water out of the aquifers. That's a big problem, because remember, each of these wells, and there's 8 wells on each pad. So each well's taking 2 million gallons of water. That's 16 million gallons of water per pad. There's 6 to 8 of these pads per square mile. That's 96 million gallons of water. Now this is a conservative estimate. Okay, now let's just round it up for easy calculation. Let's say it's 100 million gallons of water. They mix about 5% of toxic chemicals with that water. The industry claims that it only mixes about 0.5%, but that's a big crock. It's on average about 5%. So it's water, sand. The sand is used to keep the cracks open once they fracked it, and the chemicals. So 5% of 100 million gallons is 50 million gallons. So that's 50 million gallons of toxic chemicals that are being pumped into the geology. Now the problems really start, if we haven't run out of water. The problems really start because they can only claw back about 50% of what they pump in the ground. So the rest is lost. And they have no idea. Anybody who tells you that they know where that 50% is going is lying. They do not know. So, well, exactly, and it'll just keep going forever. I mean, that's why, sometimes, I've heard people say, oh yeah, but what if we say a mile around the pad? Well, so what? Because this stuff could literally percolate 20, 30, 50, 100, 200 miles. It'll just keep going. And the problem might not arise for 5, 10, 20 years. But what you've done is you've effectively set off a time bomb. What we've seen in Australia is literally just after 5 years, just 5 years, the water, the soil, and the air becomes contaminated, because what happens when they pump this stuff down into the geology, it goes beyond the edge of the target geology, so it effectively creates artificial pathways for the gas to flow into the adjoining geology, which is probably and often naturally more porous. So it's like this gas has been locked in this tight geology for millennia, and then man in his arrogance comes along and releases it, and the gas just like, wow, and it's off. It's off on a mission, and the mission is just to find the path of least resistance. Exactly. So it'll just be pumping out there. So what we see in Australia is that the gas that's released from the tight geology migrates into the aquifers. And one of the reasons it migrates into the aquifers so quickly is because the gas companies are sucking water out of the aquifers. So there's this big void in the aquifers, and the gas says, right, we'll fill the void. So of course then the gas mixes with the water and it comes up in the water. And if you look on the video that I put up there, called Fractured Future. It's 2 3/4 hours long, so you're getting the potted version here.
It's worth watching.
You can skim along it, you know, that's the beauty of YouTube, is that you can skim along it. But you'll see that I've included...
Much better in person, though.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, obviously, you can look at my tablet.
Yeah, I can't watch it. What you'll see in there is that I include the footage from Australia, and none of the footage I use is older.
Whereabouts are they fracking in Australia?
Well, this is in Queensland, in southern Queensland. And in fact...
so it's not in the middle of... No, there is...
This is not in the middle of nowhere, but it's not in a densely populated environment like this either.
No.
So, you know, there are people that are affected, and in fact you'll see the people that I talk about in the video, because I film on a farm which is run by the Monk family. And you know, I show the problems that they've encountered with the gas in the water. I mean, they've literally created this piece of kit so the water comes straight out of the well, and they've got a pipe connected to the water, and you can burn a flame on top of the pipe.
No way.
Then I show the gas coming up through the soil. Now, because methane is odourless, this is the problem.
Yeah.
So you don't realise that you're living in a methane contaminated environment. So because the methane isn't so excessive that you're asphyxiated, you can't smell it.
Yeah.
So you don't realise anything's going on day to day, but because methane is a neurotoxin, eventually it creeps up on you, and one of the common denominators in many of the places, particularly in like Colorado and New Mexico, where they've been doing this stuff for 20 years, is communities going into early dementia.
Yeah.
So you can find communities in West Colorado where people are in dementia in their 40s and 50s, as opposed to their 70s and 80s, which we would consider more normal. And of course, you know, because you don't see it day to day, you know, you don't notice it. And in the US, when you see David Cameron saying there's never been a proven case where water's been contaminated with frac fluids, well, in the US, the oil and gas industry is exempt from having to acknowledge any contamination.
Yeah.
And this is thanks to Dick Cheney, because Dick Cheney was the chief executive officer of Halliburton between 1995 and 2000. And then, of course, in early January of 2001, he was sworn in as vice president. Well, in 2005, he got the US Senate to introduce legislation, and if you remember Halliburton loophole, that's all you need to remember, Halliburton loophole, and you'll find a whole bunch of stuff written where Cheney instructed the US government to exempt the oil and gas industry from having to acknowledge or report any contamination of water, soil or air. So even when people claim and prove that their water's contaminated, the oil and gas industry, what it'll do is it will provide what's called buffalo tanks. Yeah. It'll bring in a buffalo tank of fresh water. But it will then get the farm owner or house owner to sign a document to say that they are grateful for the delivery, but they will not blame it on the oil and gas industry. And so you have to sign a confidentiality agreement, and if you refuse to sign it, then the water's removed.
Yeah.
But they will also claim that they're not giving you the water because they're acknowledging any liability of contamination. They're just being neighbourly.
What a swindle.
Yeah.
And so, consequently...
Con, isn't it?
Dodgy is that?
Well, it gets even more dodgy because even this week, at the beginning of the week, Cameron stated that there's never been a case where it's been proven that water's been contaminated by the fracking operation. Yet we now know that a year ago, Sussex Water Authority actually wrote to the Environment Agency with their concerns about fracking contaminating the water, and it was suppressed. So, you know, if there was ever any doubt, or that basically your government does not have your best interests at heart, this is it.
Yeah.
So, this is driven by just outright greed. Now, that's on the very base level. There may be much more to it than that, but at the very base level, this is outright greed. And what they're trying to do is what they call achieve social license. Now, social license is an absurd phrase that you probably haven't heard before, but you will now. Now I've mentioned it to you, you will hear it mentioned on the news or any broadcast about fracking, or you read it in the paper. And what these companies will say is that they're consulting with the community to achieve social license. What that means is they're basically trying to get to the point where there's so much apathy in the local community that no one does this. Yeah. No one objects to them coming in. So actually the way things are working out right now, it's actually very good, because the two earthquakes in in the Fylde Peninsula. In fact, after the second earthquake in Blackpool, I thought, thank God for that. You know, hopefully that's enough for common sense to prevail, and that's the end of this shit. Unfortunately, of course, I didn't reckon on Lord John Brown, who is the chairman of Quadrilla, but he also sits on David Cameron's cabinet. And he was appointed to the cabinet by David Cameron on the recommendation of Francis Maud, who happens to be the MP for Balcombe.
Jesus Christ.
But just to give you a little bit of background here, John Brown is the epitome of the socio-psychopathic global corporatist. When he was the chief executive officer of BP, he took BP from a sort of second-rate national oil company to the 6th largest oil company on the planet, which it is today. And he did that through buying up companies, mainly American companies. And what he was doing, when he bought those companies, he was stripping out expenses from those companies. So what he was doing, he was stripping out the expenses that those companies were allocating to things like maintenance, health and safety, and environment. His mantra was profit above all else. So in other words, unless those expenses were directly generating revenue, strip them out. So of course what was happening is that it made it look like when BP was buying these companies, they were making these companies more profitable. But of course,
just doing away with the health and safety.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
And of course, people were dying. You know, plant was failing, and people were getting seriously injured and dying. And unfortunately, this socio-psychopath, his attitude was, well, you know, the compensation costs actually are less than the costs of trying to sort of maintain a high-quality business. Well, he finally got his comeuppance after a massive explosion in a Texas refinery in Texas City in 2005, when 15 people were killed. And there was at the time then, there was a lot of calls for him to resign because clearly his practices were somewhat less than beneficial to the employees. But he said, "Oh, I'm not going to resign straight away. I'm going to resign in 2.5 years." But he had to resign a bit earlier. He had to leave in mid-2007, but not because of anything that happened this time in BP. But the Mail on Sunday ran an expose about his private life, and they outed him as a gay. No big deal there. It's probably the worst kept secret in the oil industry anyway. But it went on to claim that John Brown was telling people around him that he'd met his gay lover whilst he was jogging in Battersea Park. Well, the Mail on Sunday claimed that he'd met his gay lover on a gay dating website called Booted and Suited. Now, I'm not about to go search that website.
Nah.
Let me know how it goes.
There's a nice setup here, but anyway, whatever.
Yeah, I work on Facebook. They're monitoring my emails. Anyway. So anyway, Booted and Suited. And then the Mail on Sunday claimed that he was using his BP expense account to pay for the apartment for his gay lover, whose name was Jeff Chevalier, by the way. Yeah, name like that.
He's called Jeff, are they?
Jeff Chevalier, or no, Chevalier. And he was paying for his London apartment out of BP expenses, and he was paying for Chevalier to travel with him, you know, on his business jaunts. Well, John Brown immediately went to the High Court, tried to get an injunction against the Mail. And for 8 days, 8 consecutive days, John Brown took the oath, because the judge insisted that John Brown turn up in court himself. He took the oath to swear that the Daily Mail, or the Mail on Sunday, had got it wrong. And he had met the gay lover, Jeff Chevalier, whilst he was jogging in the park, and it was totally fallacious to suggest that he was abusing his BP expense account to finance the guy's lifestyle. Well, the Mail on Sunday, of course, was releasing a little bit more information every day. And on the 8th day in court, John Brown took the oath and he said, I might have made a mistake. Oh yeah, I might have met him on a gay date.
You might have done.
Funny how things slip your mind, isn't it?
But he said, that's what he said, I think I said it, I made a mistake. If there's any truth in the suggestion that I've been using BP expenses, I'll make reparations, he'll pay back. Well, the Mail on Sunday, of course, immediately called for him to be charged with perjury, like you or I would have been.
Yep.
But the judge ruled that he wouldn't be charged with perjury, that the shame that he brought on himself and BP was punishment in the whole.
Like it is for everyone else.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, you know, what you're realising, of course, here is that there's 2 types of corruption in this country. There's the officially sanctioned corruption, where all the people in power are getting the appropriate backhanders. And then there's the other corruption, which is where the people in power are not getting the backhanders, and therefore it ends up in the courts.
Yeah.
So this gets better, doesn't it? Because here we've got a guy whose track record when he was the chief executive officer of BP is one of cutting all the essential expenses regarding health, safety, maintenance and environment. And then, of course, he demonstrates that he has a very casual relationship with integrity by lying in the High Court for 8 days before eventually, of course, the evidence is so overwhelming, he has to say, OK, I made a mistake. Anyway, so roll the clocks forward to June 2010, and after the election, David Cameron, on the instruction of Francis Maude, the MP for Balcombe, appoints John Brown to the cabinet, wait for it, as a special advisor on business ethos. I mean, you couldn't make this shit up.
You couldn't, could you?
That is the most well said thing at the moment, is you can't make this shit up. Everybody's saying that is in.
I mean, people haven't realised that their government are taking the piss out of them, basically. And they're saying, you know what, we can get away with this because we know there's a number of people out there who know what's going on, but it's not enough of you. And we can literally ride roughshod over you, and if you think we can't ride roughshod over you, watch
this.
So that's why, this is this we have to do something about, because I mean, we've talked about the water issue, we've talked about the chemicals that go into the ground. The other issue, by the way, is that the Quadrilla still don't have a game plan what they're going to do with what's called the produced water, which is a horrible misnomer, because the produced water
comes back
out. Yeah, but of course it's not water.
Stored in big cylinders.
Exactly. Well, they're talking about storing it in double-skin tanks until they decide what they're going to do with it. But of course the problem is that this produced water isn't just water, it's not even just the water and the chemicals, because it's bringing up the debris that's been created by the fracking process, and much of that debris will probably be radioactive as well, because of the significant radon deposits that lie in the geology under this country. So at the moment they're talking about just sticking this stuff in double-skin tanks until they decide what they're going to do with it. In the US, for 20-odd years now or more, they've been using a process called evaporation pits. Now, fortunately, evaporation pits are illegal in the EU, but the evaporation pits has certainly made some of the health issues in the US a lot worse. Because what they were doing is simply digging pits alongside the pads and lining the pits with plastic, and then pouring the produced water into the pits and literally allowing it to evaporate. And of course, anybody living downwind, plus of course it's going up into the clouds, so consequently, whole areas of the US and now Australia are basically uninhabitable. And there is collateral. Obviously, collateral is the term used for the unfortunate souls that are affected. Now we have to put a couple of things into perspective here, because in the UK we don't have a great track record with collateral. Fortunately, this is before the days of the internet, or unfortunately, whichever way you look at it. But between 1850 and 1996, so that's 146 years. 195,000 people lost their lives in the coal mining industry in this country as a direct result of the mining industry. Now that's just people who were killed in accidents directly related to coal mining. That doesn't include the people that died of respiratory diseases, etc. 195,000 people over 146 years, that's an average of 4 people a day, every single day, for 146 years. Now, although the population would not have known anything about that, we have to think that the government would have known, but they decided that that's just the price that you have to pay to get the fuel that's going to power this industrial society. But now, I tell you what, if this kicks off, if this agenda kicks off, it's going to make 195,000 people look like piecemeal. And the other argument is that, unfortunately, people who obviously worked in the coal mining industry, it's a very grey area, but I mean, there was a choice, perhaps. I know the arguments about, they couldn't, that's where they were brought up, and they couldn't move out, etc., etc. But nonetheless, if you lived in that area and you were part of the coal mining industry, you knew the risks. Okay, with this, nobody's being given a choice. The people of Balcombe have stated categorically they don't want fracking here. The people of Blackpool and St Anne's have stated categorically they don't want fracking. The sun today Does anybody read the Sun?
No.
No, don't answer that. Mystic Meg. Oh, I read the Sun. I do read the Sun. I read the Sun and the Daily Mail. They're the only two papers I pretty much read every day. I do read all the other papers probably once a week, but I read the Sun and the Mail every single day. And the reason I read the Sun and the Mail every day is because that accounts for 15 million people in this country. And by reading the Sun and the Mail every day, I know what 15 million people in this country believe to be the gospel truth. So I know my start point. I know where I'm working from and what we've got to change. And when you see, like the editorial in today's Sun, literally dismissing everyone who has the audacity to challenge the shale gas agenda as a conspiracy theorist, I mean, you know that they've hit rock bottom. Because, I won't even talk to the mainstream media because I just know that I'm wasting my breath and wasting my energy. So we've got to be creative in terms of getting this information out there, and we've got a great opportunity obviously with social media. But the key difference between the mainstream media and what we have the opportunity to do is I don't want you to take anything I'm saying here at face value. You don't need to, because otherwise it's just something you heard from some random guy standing opposite the gate of Balcombe. The important thing is to take a look at this for yourself. Look at documentaries. Gasland's a good one. In my opinion, Split Estate is a better documentary than Gasland. And Split Estate, unfortunately the name doesn't roll off the tongue like Gasland, but Split Estate refers to who owns what. And Split Estate means that basically as the landowner, you own the surface, and in theory, access to that surface. But the British government is now looking at introducing legislation to even remove that from the landowner. And the Australian government are doing the same. So split estate means that the landowner owns the land, access to the land, and you're given permission to have about that much access to the surface so you can grow a root vegetable or dig a pond or whatever. But woe betide you if you find any gold or silver, because that's owned by the Crown, Crown City of London. And if you find any hydrocarbons, they're owned by the state. So now we've got the ridiculous situation in this country. What's happened this week? Earlier in the week we saw I think it was the Bishop of Blackburn stating that he was totally against fracking and the church should be against fracking because it destroys God's creation. And yet yesterday we saw the Church of England stating that it's going to use some very ancient legislation to claim the mineral rights on all church lands because it wants to use the revenues that it can get from fracking to give to the poor.
What?
Yeah. Which one?
Which
yeah.
What the alive though to give to?
Well, exactly.
Some poor baronet with down to his last million.
This whole thing should be a no-brainer, and that's why what's important here is that we've got to, and we've literally got a few weeks, at best a few months, to literally get this right out into the wider consciousness across this country. Because once people do understand what's occurring here, I think we've got an opportunity, a massive opportunity for a very significant game changer. Because this is actually going to wake people up to the realisation that actually, there's an agenda fucking kill you. However you want to look at it, that's what's happening.
And they know about it.
And they know it.
Yeah.
They know it. 8 years ago, the chief executive officer of Nestle, a guy called Peter Brabeck, he recorded an interview, and in that interview he stated that in his opinion access to fresh water should not be regarded as a human right. Basically what he was saying, and by the way, if you go to Nestle's own website, and this is 8 years on, you go to Nestle's own website, you'll see a whole bunch of stuff where they're saying, oh, he was taken out of context, he didn't really mean that. Bollocks. It's very clear what he meant. It's very, very clear. What he was basically saying was that unless you're on the corporate payroll, unless you're a corporate slave, then you have no right to access fresh water. Where this is going, and I'm going to be conservative here, in 50 years, probably less, but in 50 years, if you want access to clean air, you will have to pay for it. It will become a utility. So what's going to happen is that if you're on the corporate payroll, you'll be able to drink your fresh water, probably desalinated or whatever, but you'll be able to drink your fresh water, and you will have clean air because it will be pumped into the building because your corporate employer will want to keep you fully functional. When you go home, or if you're in your car, you'll pay extra for a micron filter, so that you at least...
What about when you're walking about though?
Well, you know, but you're limiting the exposure. You're limiting the exposure. I mean, if you're exposed to something 24/7, it's very different than if you're exposed to something for a few minutes, you know, or even a few hours. So if you work on the basis that the bulk of your time is either in your workplace of work, in your car, in your home, well then you probably have a mask, and you'll pay for the bottle.
Oh, what a shame!
I know this sounds absurd. It's meant to sound absurd, but you know, if you go to Ireland, if you talk to the people in Ireland, 10 years ago, if you'd have told somebody in Ireland that they would have to pay for their water, they would have laughed at you. Because what was embedded in Irish consciousness was that access to water was a human right and was provided by the state, the government. Now the Irish are paying for water. Okay? So it sounds absurd, and unfortunately our governments and those who write the longer term agendas, they work on the basis that the vast majority of people can't actually think beyond the next episode of Coronation Street or EastEnders or X Factor, or maybe the next salary check, or maybe the next annual holiday. But their ability to actually think forward is restricted. Whereas these guys work on the basis of 5, 10, 20, 50, 100, would you believe even 500-year agendas. And so this is the first time since I came out of the corporate world 13 years ago, this is the first time I've ever focused on something that's happening right now, because normally I'm talking about what's coming down the pipe. I'm trying to sort of prepare people for what's coming in the future. And unfortunately, I'm right more often than I'm wrong, and I don't claim any special insight to that. I read the scripts. I know where to look. I know who to look for, and I can tell you that pretty much everything I put out there is written somewhere, and you'd be amazed in some cases how long ago it was written. A lot of what is happening now we can actually trace back to the, well, I could go further back, but certainly the 1930s. In fact 1932 with a document called Technocracy Inc., which talks about the total control of the population, and effectively everybody being on the corporate payroll. Well, we can see where this is heading. So, but look at this as an opportunity, you know, because we can look at this as a nightmare scenario, and in the worst case, this is Armageddon. And that's the worst case scenario. But let's look at it as an opportunity, because sometimes, you know, people need a massive slap round the side of the head to wake them up. And that's what this is. This is that slap around the side of the head. Now, the reality is that not everyone's going to see it, and people are going to say, oh, that God, it's a conspiracy theory because I read it in the Sun.
Oh, they got to be right.
Well, they got to be right, exactly. Well, and the other thing is, of course, that what this is also going to do is it's going to show a hell of a lot of the population that the mainstream media
are lying bastards.
You know, print whatever it is that they're effectively told to print. And a lot of the journalism is cut and paste. Now, the days of the investigative journalist are long gone. And as we know, that if any journalist tries to write something which goes against the sort of orthodox agenda, it never gets published and they get fired. That's why a lot of the senior journalists are basically kicked out, and no disrespect, but it's young kids who are pretty much taught to cut and paste. I'll just cut and paste that. So look at this as an opportunity, and I don't think we've actually ever had a better opportunity, because, you know, around the camp here, the one thing that you can actually guarantee is that not everyone here is going to agree on everything. But one thing you can guarantee is that the vast majority of people, and even some of these in uniform, agree on one thing, and that is that this ain't a great idea. And what we got to do is forget the mainstream media. I mean, I won't even talk to them, and the whole purpose of the mainstream media is to make everyone here look like a rampant, raving radical.
That's what the media is doing. When I've seen the news, it's violent, it's you're all really bad people, and it's a load of rubbish.
They're all hooligans.
So this is really good, but you've got to get heard more, because you're not getting
well, we don't, but we've got to be creative. And that creativity has got to come through things like the social media, like the networking. In the first half of this year, I did a tour of the country, 63 dates around the country. Now, some people were coming to those talks because they wanted to hear about fracking. Some people were coming to those talks, they knew nothing about fracking, but they knew of me. So it's like, okay, who are you? I have no idea. Who am I? Ian R. Crane. Okay, so, yeah, I always work on the basis, by the way, that people find out about my work when they're ready. So maybe today's your
lucky day.
Today's your lucky day, So, you know, I sort of work beneath the radar. I definitely do not make any attempt to get into the mainstream, because that's not my audience. Now, I work on the basis that if I'm putting stuff out, 100% of the people that are receiving it are interested in it, whereas the mainstream, the vast majority ain't interested. It's, you know, straight over the head.
Is this going to make a difference?
Well,
is this going to stop it?
Yes. Well, we don't. Hey, hang on. We've got off to a tremendous start here. That's for sure. Because what's happening here, and by the way, this wouldn't be happening if it wasn't for Blackpool. So look at the sequence of events. You know, the two seismic events in Blackpool helped raise an awareness. When the rig, there was starting to be the talk of Balcombe being the next target, then obviously that raised another level of awareness. Then the realisation that 64% of England sits above shale gas or coal bed methane. So this isn't a not in my backyard situation. I can tell you, the only areas of this country that will not be affected directly are Eastern Essex, Suffolk, West Wales, South West England and the Lake District. So right now, if you think this agenda is going to kick off, I'd go down to Aberystwyth, where the economy has been in the toilet for about 2 decades. The only reason Aberystwyth keeps going is because of the university there. Property you can pick up for an absolute song, but if this kicks off, within 20 years, somewhere like Aberystwyth is going to become prime target, because what's going to happen? It's already happening. The property market in Blackpool is dead. When I was in Blackpool earlier this year and I was talking to a number of estate agents, you know, one of these guys said, Ian, you're absolutely right. He said, it's buyer's market right now. And he said that since the moratorium was lifted, a lot more property has come onto the market. And if the drilling and fracking operation goes ahead, and Quadrilla, by the way, have plans for over 100 pads just in the Blackpool area. If the drilling and fracking goes ahead, then most of that property will never sell. Even in Balcombe right now, the property market here is stressed, and last weekend I was talking to a guy who has been trying to sell his house for a little while. He thought he had a buyer. Quadrilla came into town, buyers have pulled out. That happens everywhere in the world. It's not just Blackpool, it's not just Balcombe, it happens everywhere. The property market totally tanks. So what's going to happen? What's going to happen is that the people who have access to the money, i.e. the upper middle classes or whatever, who have access to the money or have access to the borrowing capacity, they're going to realise what's going on. They're not going to wait to sell their house, they're just going to get the fuck out. Yeah. So consequently that's going to put enormous pressure on property prices, particularly in East Essex and Suffolk, because of its proximity to London. The southwest is already outrageously priced, so you know this is going to go stratospheric, and so you know West Wales is going to become prime target. So these are the knock-on effects. We've got other knock-on effects that are not being considered. Every one of these pads, when it's drilled and fracked with the 8 horizontal wells, and this is a conservative estimate again, will require about 4,000 truck movements. Look at what happens with a couple of dozen. Yes. Right? This road has been ripped up by a couple of dozen, maybe 3 dozen truck movements over the past few weeks. Imagine, you know, in the course of a pad, you know, thousands of truckloads. So, plus we've got obviously the increase of traffic on the road. You're going to have the increase in traffic accidents, putting pressure on the already stretched health service, and that's before we even get into the problems associated with exposure to the frac fluids or the methane or anything else. So it doesn't matter how you look at this. It's a bad idea. So, in the course of the tour I did around the country, we had about 2,000 people, just under, come to those events. In some cases, people came along with every intention of shooting me down, and I can tell you that not a single person ever wrote back to me and said that what I'd said was a crock of crap. Because once they look at it for themselves, they realise that everything I've said is the case. So this is our challenge. The challenge is to get the word out there objectively. Don't preach. I mean, one of the problems I have is that I've spent most of my time here talking to the police. And I just sort of dropped seeds, you know, because most of the guys are Sussex police, so I've had a map with me and I've shown them the areas that are affected. And I know that some of these guys, of course they do. So I'm basically, you know, just encouraging them to go home and take a look. Now what we know is that some of the police have actually asked not to be assigned to Balcombe.
I heard that.
Which is actually probably a surefire way of making sure that they're assigned to Balcombe. That's the way the police work, isn't it? But anyway, the reality is that these guys, and in fact one of the things that I'm hearing more and more with the police is don't confuse the uniform with the person.
Yeah. They're just doing their job.
They're doing their job. They're doing their job. So, you know, when I hear people barracking them saying, oh, you know, you're carrying out the...
They're just here to
Well, they are, but they're doing exactly what they're being told to do. And I think that as this goes on, as more and more people start to realise, you know, the full magnitude of the impact, it's going to be more and more difficult for this government to carry out the agenda. But like I said, let's not get carried away with false bravado. Yes, this looks impressive, but you know, actually the permanent group here is probably only about 60 or so, although the camp is expanding. Over the next few weeks, but that's only the weekend. But the challenge over the next few weekends, and this is the critical element, there's going to be a lot of people here this weekend, and the next major sort of entertainment weekend, the carnival weekend, is September the 1st, Sunday, September the 1st, with the choirs. But what you'll see when you come down here at the weekend is that the people that are coming in from all over the country, they're not the rampant radicals. It's people from right across the whole spectrum of society. You know, there's a lady from the village, she's just registered the domain name Conservatives Against Fracking. But you know, we need to see socialists against fracking, communists against fracking, anarchists against fracking. I mean, I don't care which part of the political spectrum that you come from, you know, this impacts on all of us. And so, you know, that's why I say what we've got to try and do is get people to recognise that whatever other differences we have, we've got to put them behind us, we've got to focus on this. Because if we don't get this shut down, everything else actually becomes irrelevant.
Yeah.
So, sorry, how long did you have?
Thank you.
Well, good, yeah. Thank you very much.
Well, hey, listen, I'm just one guy.
Yeah,
you know, but it's spread the word.
Well, it's gonna, I mean, I live in a place where it's going to start, so I wanted to know more about it.
Well, look, I'm doing an event in London on September the 15th at the Connaught Rooms. The reason I use the Connaught Rooms, by the way, and I always ask for a very specific room in the Connaught Rooms, the Cambrian Suite, because it's as close as I can get to the Grand Lodge without actually walking through the front doors. And so it's very deliberate, you know, because the people we get in there bring a very different energy to Great Queen Street. So the event on September 15th is called From Fracking Nightmare to Agenda 21, Killing Us Softly.
Whoops.
So it's runs from 11 o'clock till 6 o'clock. There's a few breaks in there. But then, you know, we'll expand on this and show you all the detail, and of course explain the whole process. And once again, you know, the whole purpose is to, because Boris has said, let's frack London. You know? I mean, this is
Frack Boris.
You know,
God, he's a jackass.
He just wants to sell us that dog. He wants to shag him.
dog.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Hull and East Yorkshire. It's all different groups. Again, coming from all different parts of society, all doing their own thing. I mean, there's 3 groups in Blackpool, and when I gave a talk in Blackpool on February the 11th, which was 2 weeks after I met with the Quadrilla management team, by the way, because I told them I was going to do this tour, and I just wanted to see how far they would go in the lies that they were telling me. And of course, they just trot out the usual stuff. You know? They live in a world of cognitive dissonance.
They do, don't they?
I mean, it is absolute industrial denial, you know, institutional denial, because if they actually accepted the reality of what they're doing, they would have to accept and acknowledge that it's inherently unsafe, ecocidal, and ultimately genocidal.
Oh, yeah.
So, anyway, back to the point, the 3 groups in Blackpool were about to combine under one banner. I said, no, please don't do that. Yeah. You know, network, coordinate, liaise, but do your own thing.
Yeah.
Because the establishment and the industry, you've got to remember, this is a $5 trillion industry on a global basis. These guys know how to deal with opposition, they think. And to date, they're generally very successful. And they love hierarchical organisations because they can actually, it's worth their while. Well, pay a few people. I mean, listen, you find the right people, pay them 100, 250,000, whatever it takes. If they're the right people, get in there, get on the leadership team, and effectively disrupt.
Yeah, infiltrate, penetrate, and annihilate.
Yeah, demonise it, marginalise it, you know. I mean, a classic case of that was Fathers for Justice in this country, which was becoming very, very effective in terms of campaigning. This was fathers campaigning for access to their children. And it was becoming so successful that they set them up with the outrageous claim that they were planning to kidnap Tony Blair's youngest son. I mean, it was a crock of crap. But of course, as far as the media was concerned, they had a field day with it. And what it did was it lost Fathers for Justice all the credibility that they built up in the public eyes. Now, what we've got to be careful with this is our target audience is Middle England. And that doesn't mean the middle classes, it just means average guy. And what we've got to be very careful of is, you know, to try and ensure that, you know, we don't marginalise ourselves. That's why, you know, this weekend, I actually hope to God that nothing happens. I mean, I love the hype that there's going to be direct action because it's got 500 police or whatever here. It's cost Quadrilla £100,000 in razor wire and barricades and everything else that they've built up on their site.
That's what one of the police said to me this morning. They said, you know, there'll probably be some direct action going on with these guys coming down. I said, well, actually, they don't have to do any direct action because putting their tents up will close this down.
Absolutely, for 6 days.
Yeah,
so I must confess that I am hoping that, you know, whatever goes on is benign, because what we cannot afford is to present an easy win to the mainstream by doing something that alienates Middle England. It's a very fine game we're playing, but I think right now we've got a tremendous opportunity because these anti-frack groups are springing up like bloody mushrooms all around the country, and they're all operating independently. We're using the social media to wonderful effect, and this is what we've got to, you know, continue to do. But that's why I will continue to do the public talks, because, you know, social media is one part of it, but you know, I don't think you can actually beat getting a group in to come and hear what you have to say, and also challenge, throw the questions at. Last Monday, by the way, one of those amazing pieces of synchronicity, but I was just about to leave to drive home, because I live in Devon, and I was about to go back for a few days, and one of the guys here gave me a call and said, Ian, there's a meeting in Horsham tonight, it's the Skeptics in the pub, and they've got a debate on fracking. Well, they'd already got two formal speakers. They'd already got two formal speakers to present the pro and the... Anyway, I said, well, okay, yeah, fine, I'll come along, why not? Anyway, as it happens, both the speakers were pathetic. I mean, they didn't even know enough to be dangerous. And as luck would have it, they both had to leave early. So they both had to get on a train at like 9 o'clock, which meant that half the evening went begging. So then the chairman said, well, we've got a couple of people here. One of the guys from Blackpool, whose house was damaged in the earthquake, was there with me. So he took the floor and he gave his sort of experiences of living in the earthquake zone. And then the guy that invited me said, well, look, you know, this is Ian, he's spent 20 years in the oil industry, he knows about this, you know. So I then took the platform, and then Skeptics in the Pub. It's a UK-wide organisation that they have meetings around the country. And their whole purpose is basically to find all the holes they can in the arguments being presented. So you have no idea what they really think, because they're there to be belligerent. And it was fantastic. It was fantastic because, sure, these guys were very, very good, because you know, a couple of times they were getting me onto ground that I wasn't particularly comfortable with. So of course I had to try and wrestle the ground back into areas that I was comfortable with. Anyway, after 40 minutes, the chairman basically said, well, he said, I think I can probably speak for everybody, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's unanimous. Fracking should be banned in the UK.
Absolutely.
And that's why you cannot beat the opportunity to actually, you know, talk to
get out there and explain
audience.
But that's the problem with a lot of people. You know, you mention it, they go, oh yeah, they go so fuddled about it. They don't have the information. They read the Sun, they read the Daily Mail, and they think that is gospel. And of course, David Cameron wouldn't lie to us, would he? He's our Prime Minister.
Actually, David Cameron wouldn't tell us the truth, would he?
No.
He's our Prime Minister.
No, exactly.
Well, they're not sitting on the backside, these guys, are they? I mean, I was stopped by a guy when I just walked up to the village there, and he came over on his bike and started engaging me in conversation. He says, oh, you're one of the protesters, are you? He said, well, I hope they do frack here. And then he started reeling off all these, well, I can only assume the bogus statistics, you know, about how good fracking would be. But how do you counter it? As, you know,
well, listen. I mean, all you can, don't waste your breath. Because there are always going to be people who think it's a great idea. We don't have to get the whole country to agree with us. You know, there's been a lot of research in the US that says if you can actually get to about 9% of the population, that's the point at which something goes viral. So that 100th monkey may actually be a lot closer than we think. We're not there yet, though.
No, but when you're confronted with that in a public meeting like you're talking about, how do you actually counter the arguments that are put up, even if they're specious?
Well, all I would say is that, first of all, these are the key elements to remember. Where's the water coming from? Right. And don't let anyone tell you that you can use seawater. There's been some usage in the Middle East of desalinated water, but we don't have any desalination plants here, so it ain't coming from desalinated water. In the US, they are sucking the Great Lakes and the Great River system dry. Right now, in Texas, you've got communities, actually in Texas, in New Mexico, and in Colorado, they're in drought. They're in serious drought there, and it's cyclical, but you know they're in drought. And their local communities are trying to actually take the gas companies to court to stop them fracking, because of course they're taking literally millions of gallons out of the aquifers. And there are people in Texas who have had no water coming out of their taps for 4 weeks. And the gas companies, you know, don't give a shit. So in the US, they're taking water from the Great Lakes, the Great River system, and the aquifers. In Australia, they're taking the water from the Great Artesian Basin at a rate 6 times greater than it can naturally replenish. In this country, we don't have Great Lakes, we don't have a Great River system, and we don't have a Great Artesian Basin. So where is the water coming from? And like I said, it's 100 million gallons at a conservative estimate per square mile. And you'll notice that these are the issues that aren't being discussed in the mainstream media, because they haven't got the answers. And like I said to you earlier, we know from earlier this week that Sussex Water Authority specifically asked the Environment Agency about the issue of water. So, called water abstraction. Where is the water coming from? That's a critical issue.
Right, that'll do, that's enough really. Great stuff, thanks.
Nice one. Yeah, that's scary stuff, isn't it?
I'm in there.
So that, my friends, is a Beast of Balcombe.
The Beast of Balcombe.
It is, isn't it?
It is.
Oh, God. Protected by razor wire galore.
This guy is absolutely wonderful. Very good work.
And it's operating as a company here. What happens if something goes wrong?
Nobody wants to touch the insurance with what they're doing here. So these people cannot get enough insurance cover to even cover a minor spill. If one of their lorries, one of their tankers had a minor spill, and it damaged the roads or it got into the drains or whatever, and they had to clean it up. Well, I think they've got £37,000 is their ceiling on their insurance that they pay. Anything after that will be paid from the taxpayer. So that's how dangerous it is. They can't even get insured, and that's why people can't get their houses insured for damage caused by anything to do with fracking or the oil industry in general. Yeah, that's absolutely disgusting.
As a new industry, you've got all kinds of new risks which haven't been tested in any kind of practical purpose method. So nobody has this experience, which is one of the ways where it's gone so far as it has, because it's very difficult to have an opinion about it.
Yeah, that's a problem.
And the thing is, these people haven't even done any drilling, any test drilling. You know,
what here, other than
Quadrilla, as far as I know, have not got any experience.
What, previously in this country? Really?
They don't have a clue what they're doing.
They haven't done it before.
They haven't done it
That's what someone was saying up at the Reclaim the Power camp.
And
they're just cowboys.
They are.
They are.
They've got the cheek on their website to say that they have that what happened out in America, because they know that's been publicised, they know people know about that. That was done by rogue people, and they used that word, rogue drilling companies, who have since been taken out of the picture, and they have improved their techniques so much that they can guarantee that that won't happen. Right? How can they, when they've not ever done any of this drilling, have improved techniques that they've been using in America for years and years and years? On the Quadrilla
15 years.
Yeah, 15 years experience out there. These have been on the scene for 5 minutes, yet they've improved what they do in America. The other thing is, the other thing is that on their website they categorically say that when they do fracking, they use sand and water and one chemical.
Yeah.
Yeah. In America, when they had to give report to Congress in 2011, they admitted under oath that they use 750 different chemicals in the process, which if you go down to the info tent, I've got a printout of every one of them. Okay, this is written down, it is noted, it is true. Okay, they can't. I want to know how that company, who knows nothing about what they're doing, has improved it so that they can get rid of 749 chemicals and still do the same job better than they do in America.
Yeah.
And that if you go on the website, have a look and see, their website tells you that. And when they say about how much water they use, they try and deceive you again by, they quote it in cubic meters of water. They don't tell you gallons because they know people know what gallons like.
Yeah.
Yeah. When you talk about a cubic meter, how many gallons is that? Yeah.
Thousands.
Cubic meter is this big, isn't it? It's the
It's a meter.
thing.
It's a meter.
The water thing that came today is 1 or 2 tons of water.
Right.
One cubic meter.
1 cubic meter.
Meter is 1
Okay.
1 ton.
So what they do the same as they did when they introduced decimal system to this country, and they changed gallons to litres so that we wouldn't work out we were paying more per gallon for it, because we were used to paying so much for our fuel, that's so much a gallon.
Yeah.
When they introduced litres, they nobody could quite do the math. So they could put another penny on it, per litre. You wouldn't notice that, but you were paying about 12–15 pence more on your gallon, which you would have gone up tight about. So Quadrilla have done the same thing with their statistics.
The opposite, so they've reduced the number.
What they've said is we use 8,400 cubic meters of water per frac. Okay. 8,400 is a lot less than the 8.5 million gallons that equates to. Right, 8.5 million gallons. You cannot write that down on a piece of paper and have anybody go, that's too much.